My wolf went quiet before it happened. That was always how I knew. Not the whispers, not the watching eyes, not the way the ceremonial circle felt smaller than it did this morning. My wolf went quiet, pulled tight inside my chest, like a breath I was afraid to release, and I knew something irreversible was coming. My name is Paula, and I have been surviving Jack for 3 years. The day was perfect. That was the cruelest part. The sky was open and blue above the ceremonial ground. The pack elders had marked the circle at dawn with the old symbols, ash and pine resin, and the iron dark soil from the territory's heart. 300 wolves had assembled in their finest, faces turned toward the circle with the reverent attention our kind reserves for only the most sacred moments. The mate ceremony. The moment an alpha speaks his Luna's name before the pack and the ancient spirits of their bloodline. The moment that cannot be undone. The moment that means, before every witness the world can offer, this woman is the reason I was made. I had waited 3 years for this moment. I was wearing white. I should tell you about Jack. Jack was golden. That is the only word that ever fit him. Golden hair, golden smile, the easy confidence of a man who had never once doubted that the world would arrange itself around his comfort. Every wolf in the pack loved him, every woman wanted him, and 3 years ago he had turned that golden smile on me, plain, quiet, careful Paula, and told me I was different from the others. I believed him. That was my first mistake. It was not my last. Over 3 years, Jack taught me a specific kind of love. The kind where you are always one step away from being enough. Warm for weeks, then cold without warning. And I would spend days quietly taking myself apart, certain the distance was something I had caused. My wolf knew better. She had always known better, but I had learned, somewhere in those 3 years, to keep her quiet. I should tell you about the other times, because the ceremony was not the first time Jack broke me in public. It was simply the most complete. There was the night he laughed at something I said in front of the pack elders, not cruel, just dismissive, and let it sit until everyone understood my words weren't worth taking seriously. There was the morning he said nothing while the elders questioned my bloodline, comfortable and silent while they dissected me like I wasn't in the room. Each moment taught me the same lesson. Make yourself smaller, Paula. Quieter, easier to keep. I was very well trained by the time we reached the ceremony. He was late arriving to the circle. 7 minutes. I counted them. Standing in the white dress that had cost my mother 3 months of savings, holding wildflowers I had chosen because Jack once mentioned he liked them. 7 minutes of 300 wolves watching me wait. My wolf was completely silent. I told myself it was nerves. When Jack finally entered the circle, relief moved through me like warm water. He came. He's here. It's going to be all right. He looked beautiful. Of course he did. He walked to the center of the ceremonial ground with that easy, golden confidence, and the pack settled around him like he was the sun they had been waiting to orbit. He looked across the circle toward me, and he smiled. Not at me, past me. The pack elder raised his voice in the opening words of the ceremony. The ancient language rolled across the circle, low and resonant, words our kind had spoken at mate ceremonies for longer than any living wolf could remember. I felt them in my chest the way I always felt the old language, not heard so much as recognized. Jack stepped forward. The circle went absolutely silent, and Jack opened his mouth and said a name. It was not my name. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. 300 wolves holding 300 breaths, and in the center of it I stood completely still, because my body had not yet received the information my ears had just delivered. Some part of me was still waiting, still certain I had misheard. Then my wolf made a sound I had never heard from her before. Not a howl, she had been trained out of howling. Something quieter, something that lived below sound entirely. A grief so deep it had no language, just vibration, just bone, just the pain of something that has been patient for a very long time and has finally run out of reasons to wait. I did not fall. I want you to understand that. 300 wolves were watching, and I did not fall. I had years of practice not breaking where people could see, and that practice held even now, even here, even in the worst moment of my life. My chin stayed up. My hands stayed still. The woman Jack had named moved toward him across the circle. Beautiful. Of course she was. She reached him, and he took her hand, and he did not look at me. Not once. The whispers started like water finding cracks. Poor Paula. Did you see her face? I always said he was too good for her. Plain girl, modest bloodline, no real power in her wolf. What did she expect? I heard every word. I had learned over 3 years to hear everything while pretending I could hear nothing. My wolf had stopped making that soundless grief noise. She had gone somewhere deep and dark inside me where the sounds couldn't reach. I understood why. And then I heard a different sound. A chair. Specifically, the high ceremonial seat at the edge of the circle, carved from the oldest oak on the territory, occupied today by the one wolf whose presence made every other wolf behave with slightly more formality than usual. The high seat scraped back. 300 wolves went still. Not the stunned stillness of a moment ago. Something different, something instinctive, the particular silence of every living creature in a space when something apex moves. Because the Alpha King does not move during mate ceremonies. Everyone knew this. He observes. He does not intervene. He has never intervened. Until now. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. Measured, unhurried, the footsteps of a man who has never needed to rush for anything, because the world has always arranged itself around his pace. I turned. Luke Voss, Alpha King of all Pack territories, was crossing the ceremonial ground. Dark where Jack was golden, still where Jack was animated. His eyes, when they found mine, were the deep gray of sky before a storm, and they were looking at me with an attention so complete it felt physical, like being seen for the first time by something that could actually see. He stopped in front of me. close enough that I could see the exact moment his expression shifted, not softening exactly, but opening, the way a window opens to let something through. The pack was completely silent. Jack had gone the color of ash. Luke did not look at Jack. He looked only at me. And when he spoke only to me. 3 sentences in the old language, low and resonant, felt in the sternum before they reached the ear. The claiming words: ancient, irrevocable, absolute. My wolf did not go quiet. For the first time in 3 years, she did not go quiet at all. The pack erupted. I heard it distantly, 300 voices, shock and disbelief, and the specific chaos of wolves witnessing something that has never happened in living memory. I heard Jack's voice rising above the others, sharp with protest. Luke turned his head, just slightly, and he looked at Jack with an expression so quiet and so absolute that Jack stopped mid-sentence, as though the words had been lifted directly from his mouth. Then Luke looked back at me. "Come," he said, simply, just that. And my wolf, silent for 3 years, trained to be small and unthreatening, surged forward in my chest like a tide coming in. I took the Alpha King's offered arm. I walked out of that circle with my head up and my eyes forward. And I did not look back at Jack once. The carriage that carried us away was black and utterly silent. I sat across from Luke and tried to organize my thoughts into something coherent, which was difficult because my thoughts were arranged like furniture after an earthquake, recognizable pieces, entirely wrong positions. Luke sat with the stillness of a man who had made a decision and was completely at peace with it. He did not fill the silence with reassurances. He did not perform discomfort. After 3 years of reading Jack's silences for hidden danger, there was something almost restful about a silence that simply was. "Why?" I finally asked. He turned from the window. "Because you deserved better than what he gave you," he said, "and someone needed to act." I should tell you something important about Luke and Jack. Luke could not simply have stopped Jack from hurting me. I know that question was forming in every mind that watched him cross that ceremonial ground. If he cared, why did he wait? Why 2 years of silence? Pack law. An alpha king cannot interfere in the internal dynamics of a lesser pack without formal cause, documented proof of harm severe enough to justify sovereign intervention. Jack's cruelties were real, but they were the kind that leave no visible marks. The dismissals, the public diminishments, the slow erosion of everything I believed about myself, none of it crossed the legal threshold that would have permitted Luke to act. He was not indifferent. He was bound, until the ceremony gave him the one opening that required no justification. He had been waiting for that opening. What I did not yet know was how long he had been waiting, or why. The Alpha King's palace was everything my life had not been. Vast, ancient, saturated with power so old it had become part of the architecture. I walked into my chambers expecting impersonal grandeur, a room prepared for a guest, not a person. I stopped just inside the doorway. Books lined the shelf by the window. I moved closer. specific books. Books I loved, including one narrow volume of Pack history I had mentioned wanting to read exactly once, 2 years ago, in a conversation I had nearly forgotten. It was sitting there, worn at the spine, read before it was placed there for me. My wolf pressed against my ribs, not in warning, but in recognition. She knew something I hadn't caught up to yet. The window faced east, toward the forest, toward home. Someone had been paying very close attention to me for a very long time. I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed my hand flat against my sternum where my wolf was pressing back. Who are you, Luke Voss? My wolf, for the first time in 3 years, felt something close to calm. Not the forced quiet I had trained into her, something different entirely. The calm of a creature that has arrived somewhere it recognizes. I didn't understand it yet, but I felt it. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I did not try to push the feeling away. I met Mira on my 3rd day at the palace. No ceremony, just a plain note with my morning tea. Come when you're ready. I have things to say that will be more useful than anything else you'll hear this week. Mira was the Alpha Court's elder. She had held the position for longer than most wolves had been alive, and she wore her age the way certain mountains wear theirs, not as diminishment, but as authority. Sharp gray eyes that had watched generations of power make the same mistakes and stopped being surprised by any of them. She did not ask me about Jack. She did not ask about the ceremony. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she asked, "When did your Lolf go quiet?" The question broke something open in me, not because it was cruel, because no one had ever asked it. In 3 years, in my entire life, no one had ever looked at me and seen the wolf first, asked after her directly, the way you ask after someone who has been ill. I answered honestly. I told her about the first time I silenced my wolf for Jack, how it had felt like a reasonable compromise, how I had done it so many times afterward that it eventually stopped feeling like a choice. Mira listened without pity, which was the greatest kindness. Then she said, "Your wolf chose the king before your mind did. She has always known things you refuse to hear. The question is whether you'll trust the part of yourself that was never fooled." I left the meeting with my wolf pressing urgently against my ribs, as though she had heard every word and was saying, "Finally, finally, someone said it out loud." 3 weeks into my residence at the palace, I reached my limit. It was not elegant. 3 weeks of careful distance and unanswered questions, and gifts I couldn't explain, all of it accumulating into something I could no longer manage politely. I found Luke in the war room at midnight, maps spread across the table, council documents at his elbow, alone in the way powerful men are alone, surrounded by responsibility, insulated from anything requiring them to simply be a person. I did not knock. I walked in and I said, "I am not a project." He looked up from the maps. I kept going. "I am not a strategy, not a political solution, or a symbol for whatever story this court needs to tell. I have spent 3 years being someone else's convenience, and I will not do it again. Not for a king. Not for anyone." My wolf was not quiet. She was howling, fully, freely, without apology, for the first time in years. I could feel her in every word, present and loud and completely unashamed. Luke set down his pen. He was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough to make me question everything. Then he said, "You're right." I had not expected that. "Every word you just said is right." He stood slowly, and something in his composure shifted, not collapsed, but opened, the way a door that has been locked for a long time moves on its hinges for the first time. "I didn't claim you to solve a problem, Paula." He said my name carefully, like something he had been holding gently for a long time. "I claimed you because I watched you survive, Jack, for 2 years. I watched you choose loyalty over self-preservation again and again for a man who gave you nothing in return. And the strength it takes to do that, to keep going, to keep being who you are under that kind of sustained pressure." He stopped. His jaw tightened. "You were worth paying attention to. You have always been worth paying attention to. I'm sorry it took this long for someone to say so." My wolf went quiet, but not the old way. The silence of arriving somewhere after a very long journey. For the first time in years, she stopped searching.
Jack came back. Of course he did. He arrived under the pretense of a border dispute, transparent and permitted by Luke anyway. When I asked him why he allowed it, Luke said simply, "Because you deserve the chance to face him on ground that belongs to you." He wasn't offering protection. He was offering ground. I understood the difference, and I was grateful for it. Jack found me in the East Garden. He came with the full apology, the real one, or the performance of it. "You were always the one. The ceremony was a mistake. Come home." I listened to every word. My wolf was completely silent. Not the old silence, not grief or suppression, the silence of a creature that has simply stopped being interested. When Jack finished, I looked at him, this man I had loved, this man I had made myself smaller for, and I felt something so clean it almost surprised me. Nothing. Not anger, not longing, not grief. Nothing at all. And that nothing felt like freedom. "I want you to leave," I said. Not with fury, with the calm of someone who has stopped needing a thing that once felt essential. "Paula, you should go, Jack." I held his gaze without flinching. "What you gave me wasn't love. I understand that now, and I'm not angry anymore, because everything it cost me made me exactly who I needed to be when it mattered. So thank you for that. And goodbye." A voice came from the doorway behind me. Quiet. Absolute. "You forfeited the right to speak to her the moment you walked away from that circle." Luke. He hadn't intervened. He had simply arrived, standing in the garden entrance with the stillness of something immovable, his eyes on Jack with an expression that required no elaboration. Pure alpha authority. The kind that doesn't need volume because it has never needed volume. Jack looked at him and left without another word.
The truth arrived the way Jack's cruelties always did. Sideways, in public, designed for maximum damage. A letter, sent not to me, but to 3 pack elders and the court chronicler simultaneously, timed to reach me from every direction at once. The letter detailed a conversation from 2 years ago. Luke had spoken with Jack, carefully, indirectly, suggested that strength was worth recognizing, that the kind of woman who becomes extraordinary under pressure was worth cultivating. Jack had understood, and Paula, patient, loyal, enduring Paula, had been the woman he shaped. I read the letter 3 times. By the third, I was sitting on the floor of my chambers, my back against the bed, Mira sitting across from me in silence, because she understood this was not a moment for words. My wolf was completely still. Not grief, not fury, shock, the particular stillness of a creature waiting for information that will tell her which direction to run. I had believed him. That was the thought underneath everything else. I had been so careful, so determined not to be fooled again. And I had believed him anyway. I found Luke in the great hall. He saw my face when I walked in, and he knew immediately. I watched the knowledge move through him, the stillness that settled over him, the look of a man who has been waiting for an accounting and understands it has come. I placed the letter on the table between us. "Tell me," I said, "what I was to you before you ever saw me clearly." He did not look at the letter. He looked at me. And then he told me the truth, all of it, without calculation, without managing my reaction. Yes, the conversation with Jack happened. Yes, 2 years ago he had suggested that strength was worth recognizing. Yes, it was before he knew me. But Paula, his voice dropped. The conversation happened in autumn. The first time I truly watched you was the following winter, the night Jack humiliated you at the territorial dinner, and you sat through it with your chin up and your hands folded, and your wolf completely contained. He stopped. I thought, there is a woman carrying something she should never have been asked to carry alone, and I could not stop thinking about it. The arrangement was about a concept, he said. What happened after was about you, specifically, entirely, only you. I should have told you from the beginning. I was wrong, and I will answer for that however you need me to. He did not ask me to stay. "I'll wait," he said quietly. "However long, in whatever form waiting is useful." I went to the forest that night. I shifted at the tree line, the first time I had let my wolf fully out in longer than I could clearly remember, and I ran. Not away from something, just ran, the way wolves are supposed to run, with the whole body and the whole heart, and nothing held back for safety. My wolf was extraordinary. Fast and fierce and utterly unashamed, moving through the dark forest like she had always owned every inch of it, because she had. I could quiet her, I could suppress her, I could train her out of her own instincts, but I could never make her small. She had simply been waiting for permission. I ran until the grief was gone, until the fury was gone, until I was left with only the clean, unobstructed truth of what I actually felt, underneath everything I had been taught to feel, everything I had been trained to want, everything I believed I was allowed to have. My wolf knew the answer before I finished asking. She had always known. I turned back toward the palace. Luke was on the steps when I returned. Not posed, not waiting dramatically, just sitting, jacket abandoned somewhere, a cold cup of tea beside him, looking like a man who had been there long enough that the waiting had become ordinary, looking like a man who meant it when he said he would wait. I stopped in front of him. My wolf was not quiet, not howling, simply present, fully, loudly, unapologetically present, in a way she had not been in 3 years. I'm still angry, I said, about the arrangement, about the 2 years, about being a variable in someone else's calculation before I was ever a person in it. I know. Trust is not something I give quickly. You will have to be patient with the pace of it. I know that too. And if you ever treat me as a strategy again, I held his gaze. I will leave. No bond, no law, no claiming will bring me back. I know, he said. And then, quietly, with something unguarded moving through his expression, I wouldn't want it any other way. I looked at him, and I closed the distance myself. My wolf went quiet. The quiet of homecoming. The quiet of something that had been searching for a very long time and had finally stopped.